Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I'm so pleased you joined me for today's show. Today, we're exploring the location specific tenancy guidelines for Indiana. In all of my location specific episodes, I have included a bunch of hyperlinks to that location's tenancy laws and all kinds of supporting other websites. And this is no exception. In fact, I have one, two, three, four, looks like almost 10 hyperlinks in the show notes. Each of my location specific podcasts is set up in the exact same way, answering the same four questions. First, what are the basics of that location's tenancy laws? Second, what are the nuances? What are some of the things that stand out? What could be missing in that location? Three, what's some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant who has abandoned the unit? And four, where to get help in the local area, in this case, Indiana. As I answer these questions, you'll see me screen share all kinds of documents specific to that location, as well as check off items on the bingo card to see what each location has, what they don't, what's different. Over the many years I've been doing these episodes and traveling, I've created that bingo card of standard items I see most often in tenancy laws in different locations. And then at the very end of the episode, I'll go through that bingo card to help you figure out what you need to research more, especially if you have questions or if you're just starting out. Now, I must tell you that there are more guiding documents than what I'm giving you here. This may not be everything. Even if I get this episode 100% right at the time of recording, 5 minutes later, things can and will change. So you have got to do your own research in your state, province, county, parish, city, regional district, whatever it is regarding your rental in your location, in this case, Indiana. You need to do your own research on your own. But this episode is designed to at least get you started. I'm going to give you the pathway so that you can walk through that, ask your questions, and keep current on what is going on. Okay, so let's jump into it. Let's get into screen sharing. And if you're watching on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, I've just pulled up the very first of the hyperlinks, and this is the 2024 Indiana Code Title 32, Property Article 31, Landlord-Tenant Relations. This is the tenancy law. This is the actual law, and I had to go to Justia for it. But if you want to see what's going on, each one of these is a hyperlink. It goes down further, and of course, it's all legalese because it is a law. Shocking, right? Okay. This is one of the reasons why I don't like to go to endorsed websites is because then you get a bunch of ads. So I'm actually going to go to the user guide. So that's typically what happens in these location specific podcasts is that you actually you have the law, which is not very user friendly typically, which this one isn't either. And then there's a user guide. So I think the second one, here it is. This is the user guide. So this one is 84 pages. It seems to be longer than the law, which is okay. And so this is called Renting in Indiana, a Handbook for Tenants and Landlords, second edition, 2024. What we're going to end up doing is, or 2020, we are going to go through this and we're just going to stop at the low-hanging fruit, the items on the bingo card, things like security deposits, late fees, application fees, returning security deposits, abusive access, anything that we see that sort of step is on the bingo card that I've already mentioned, even abandoned items, where to get help. And the first bit here, I'm on page 4, it pulls up indianalegalservices.org, which I think is also a hyperlink. In United Way, Indiana Legal Services does support United Way, which I'm a big supporter of. Also, there's a bunch of nonprofits on, let's see, there's on this page 4. This may not help you, but there are, again, if you have a question, you don't know where to start, just there's a ton of places to go to, and this is a good spot to at least learn the basics of this. This one says a handbook for tenants and landlords, which is good. And you'll see there's just a very simple table of contents and some appendices, which I really appreciate. They support a rent budget for tenants and then rental home search list, move in, move out checklist. Always critical, especially if you're going to take damage, you're going to take deductions for damage beyond normal wear and tear out of the security deposit. You have got to do your homework in advance and you can't do it later. You have to do it at the time. So this is very important. Lead paint, which is federal. and then resources, COVID-19 resources. So there are some pre-made templates in here. So I'm just going to scroll down here. There's a couple different things, of course. So this user guide has got some interesting guidances. And now this is, of course, more geared toward a tenant, of course. So this is all about budgeting, and this is the first month's rent. Um, so this is the first bit of our bingo card for Indiana. It says security deposit. A security deposit often is equal to 1 month's rent is the money the tenant pays the landlord to cover responsibilities of the lease. It is refundable after the tenant moves out. And some landlords may also require you to prepay rent for the last month when you move. A security deposit and last month's rent are not the same. A tenant may not use a security deposit to pay the last month's rent. So security deposit is the tenant's money. Last month's rent is actually meant rent. They are actually they're both paid in money, and that's what's confusing to a lot of people. But the security deposit is a basically the tenant's money that the landlord holds. And so this is interesting. So it looks like Indiana allows you to pay a separate last month's rent. So when a tenant comes in, they've got to be able to give you a chunk of change. Interesting. Okay, condition of the apartment or the unit, utilities, utility deposits, yeah. Tenant tip. Okay, this is all about screening the unit. Now here's pets. Okay, we don't normally see things about pets, but this is always good. Some landlords prohibit pets of any kind. Other landlords may allow pets, but have restrictions on the size or weight of the pet or the kind of pet that you may have. Landlords who allow pets will typically request a pet deposit and may require you to pay a per month charge for having a pet. That's called pet rent. Regardless, make sure to ask up front about the landlord's rules on pets, even if you do not have one now. Find out if there's a certain area you're supposed to let your dog outside, for example, a dog run or park, and if there are areas where your pet cannot go. Look around the area and see what kind of pets the neighbors have and how they're being treated. If you have a small dog and your neighbor has a pit bull that isn't on a leash, you may want to think carefully about renting. Well, that's interesting because we have not ever seen, not in a long time, about pets and pet rent. That's, in fact, I think the first location in my memory that I can remember that they've talked about pet rent. Let's talk about lease term. Typically, leases are for no longer than 1 year. Some leases are for a full year, where others are month to month or weekly basis. Some landlords offer leases for a shorter period of time. So it looks like you, yeah, looks like it is a fixed term, basically, even if it's month to month. It ends abruptly. Fixed term leases ends abruptly, it looks like. And now here's another issue with acceleration clause. The depending on the terms of the lease, you could pay the entire amount due of rent due on the lease. This kind of clause is called an acceleration clause. It says if you fail to do something required under lease, then all of the rent is due under that lease becomes due all at once. And so there's a lot of places that do not allow acceleration clauses. It looks like Indiana does allow an acceleration clause. That's kind of interesting. And okay, signing the lease. Now they're talking about written lease or oral lease. If you've been a fan of this channel for a while, you know that I am not, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And so leases should be in writing no matter what. Okay, so this is interesting because again, this document is geared towards the tenant. Acceleration clause. We talked about what utilities are required to pay, additional rules, late rent. Is there a late fee if you do not pay your rent on time? Breach of lease agreement. What happens if the landlords think you've breached your lease agreement? Okay, move-in inspection, which we already know there's one in the end. of this. Renter's insurance. Nice. Renter's insurance is mentioned, which is also on my bingo card. Indiana's hitting a lot of things that are not normally hit on the bingo card. This is actually really interesting. It talks about renter's insurance and what's best, but it just is again making a recommendation. It's not required. Recommended. I like it. All right. Utility deposits. That's Indiana specific and it's very likely location specific. Utility company complaints. This is about assistance for housing and how to get some help for payments. Okay, right to privacy moving out. Oh, wait, let's go back to right to privacy. Um, so it's talking about access of entry. Lease agreements say that your landlord may come to do emergency repairs, routine or needed maintenance and inspections, but unless your landlord needs to come into your home because of an emergency, your landlord should let you know in advance, typically 24 hours. Yeah, it's got to be reasonable, right? Yeah, if your landlord continues to visit your home without notice on unreasonable times or at unreasonable hours, keep a written record of it. This is called breach of abusive access, is what it's called, abusive access. Okay, this is talking about giving back security deposit, subleases. Okay, this is talking about all the security deposit stuff. Okay, security deposit is returned for you. And they're talking about for the tenant to leave the apartment in good condition, the unit in good condition, and then give your landlord the following, your forwarding address. That's very important too. And so it looks like 45 days is the day, or unless the lease provides a shorter time, such as 30 days. Um, okay, so it looks like 45 days is the amount. And it looks like there's also attorney's fees, which from other episodes, you'll learn that having attorney's fees in your requirements, if you go to court, if you are suing for attorney's fees, then the tenant can countersue you for attorney's fees. So that's not always ideal in certain locations. So, but Indiana talks about that as well, which is, again, really interesting how Indiana's doing a lot of unique things to do. Okay. Eviction. Okay, I am going to. So then it's got what happens when the landlord files for an eviction in this um, tenant does not move out, landlord date must be out. The landlord files a case in court against the tenant. Tenant receives the notice of the land's lawsuit by mail or by the sheriff. Notice of claim will include a hearing date. Hopefully, the hearing date is soon. First hearing is to decide who has the right to the possession of the unit. If the tenant is in violation of the lease, for example, the tenant is behind in rent, the landlord will have right to possession of the unit. Unless the tenant has a good legal defense, the court will order that tenant to be out by a certain date, usually within a few court dates, and you don't get much time to move if you're the tenant. Tenant defenses might include landlord did not give correct notice of termination, landlord continued to accept rent from you, and there's a long history of late rent payments, and the landlord did not give you a warning that late rent payments will no longer be accepted. Second hearing is scheduled for the court to decide the issue of damages if there's damages to the unit above normal wear and tear and can include whether or not the tenant owes the landlord any rent. Now, here's the trick. Even if you get a judgment, like let's say the judge gives you a judgment and says, yes, you're owed this much for damages, you're owed this much for late rent, that doesn't mean you're going to get money. So just be aware of that. Like there's a bit of a question mark when you're going through this type of eviction part as a landlord. Mike and I've gotten judgments for $10,000 for tenants that have breached and made damage and done all kinds of crazy things. But these people had no money. So we could have paid a bailiff, six, seven, $800 maybe to get something, but not $10,000. So yeah, it's interesting. Just be careful because even if you go all the way to the end, that doesn't mean that you're going to get money. Sometimes it's just the grief to dollars ratio doesn't pencil out because of the stress. So sometimes it's just better to say, you know what, done, move on, look for a new great tenant to work with for years. Um, yeah, there's all kinds of different things. So oh, here it defines retaliation, retaliation, which includes eviction. Eviction was filed by the landlord in retaliation for tenant complaint to the health department, violation of Fair Housing Act, etc. But that is it. It defines retaliation right there. Now, typically in retaliation, what I've seen is you've got a landlord does multiple things. The tenant will do something that spurs on something retaliatory from the landlord. And typically the tenant can either join a tenants union, report them to enforcement of some kind. I forget, I think there's a third one, but then the landlord will respond and it will typically be try to evict, increase rent, or decrease services. And there's typically a time frame in that. So it'll say within 6 months or within 90 days. Or sometimes there's no anything. Like for the balance of the lease, if a landlord does anything retaliatory, then it's null and void unless they can prove that it's something valid. So this is really interesting because it can get super, super confrontational, really awkward. So you got to be really careful when you're talking about retaliation. Okay. Let's see. Indiana law has a law stating a landlord should give a tenant 10-day notice to quit in cases where rent has not been paid. And okay, so it's basically 10 to pay, 10 to get out. Mobile homes, I'm just going to keep going, even though that's applicable typically. Okay, it's talking about subsidized housing, and we're going to get to the bottom here. Oh, this is the glossary. Excellent. Okay, acceleration clause. I'm going to add an acceleration clause to my bingo card. For example, if you have a lease that you're required to pay $500 a month in rent, and if you fail to pay rent for a particular month, okay, that acceleration clause would make that month's rent due plus however many months remain in your lease due all at once. If you're only 1 month into a year lease, that means you could owe 11 times your monthly rent, in this case, $5,500. Interesting. Okay, breach of lease, appeal, common, damages, disability, dwelling, emergency order, bunch of them. Net income, HEPA, hold harmless, mutual. So they have some protected classes in here, like national origin. That's a protected class in fair housing. Security deposit, waiver, waste, warrant of habitability. Okay, so then we're into the appendices. It's talking about rent budget, budgeting in a crisis, rental home search, which actually looks pretty good. Move in, move out checklist. This one's kind of small. But it says usually expect. It's a basically a spreadsheet of a list of locations and condition on move in and condition on move out. Now, again, if you are doing photos of your move in and move out, that's fine, but you can't just do photos. You have to do something in writing at the same time. The photos will supplement. So I've seen in different locations where they still have to have the document in writing, typically signed by the tenant and the landlord or the landlord's agent. So you've got to make sure that whatever you're doing, it's in writing. Pictures are good, especially if they're date stamped, which typically the digital pictures now are, but don't just do photos. You still have got to do the paperwork. Fair housing. There was a bunch in there. Lead paint. Okay, and we're heading down. So if you need help, oh, this is crisis. And then resources. Appendix G, this is page 81 of this guide. This is all about the resources of the different government housing, government offices. And so if you've got questions, legal assistant, here's a whole bunch in here. Indiana Legal Services I have in the show notes. Free Legal Answers, indiana.freelegalanswers.org, and Coalition for Court Access Self-Service Legal Center with Indiana Judicial Branch, indianalegalhelp.org. And in fact, do I have that one in there? I do. I do. In fact, wait a minute. Indiana Legal Help. No, I don't. I only have the legal aid one. All right, I'm going to add this one to the show notes because I think this is a really good one. It's a gooder. Indiana Legal Help. We're going to add that one in too. Um, I find most self-managing landlords, especially if you're small, you are pretty solution oriented. You just are not trained. You just need to get trained. So how can I help you get trained? Okay, that's the end of that one. Let's go to the next one. So that's only the second hyperlink. Now we still haven't seen things like late fees, rent increases. We haven't seen any of that yet, but we will. So this one is Indiana Renters' Rights and Responsibilities, and it's like super small. My goodness. It looks like it's a slick. It looks like it is a two-pager that's likely printed back to back. And and this is for the tenant. So it's talking about you must comply with portions of health and housing codes. You got to maintain your utility service, maintain things. There's a standard of cleanliness. You got to pay your rent. And then it talks about the rights of the landlord as well. Landlord must provide safe, clean, habitable rental unit complies with health and housing code. The landlord must make reasonable efforts to keep common areas clean and in good condition. Rights continued. This is about what to do if a landlord isn't fixing something, and you can report a problem, or you can fix it yourself, or you can move out. And then there's a bunch of resources. Oh, here's a good one. I didn't realize this. Indiana has 211. You pick up the phone and you dial 211, and it's a community navigator over the phone. You can also look at the website, in211.communityos.org. But what you do is you just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I'm a landlord. I have a problem. Where do I go?" And they will guide you. Well, that is cool, cool, cool. You can also look at, yeah, legal services is in here as well. That's cool. Okay, so that's a small one, but that's another guidance. This one is on the next hyperlink. This one is in.gov, official website of Indiana state government, and it's the homeowner and renters rights. And this is more geared towards like Section 8 housing. And so there's some things in it, but it's a little bit confusing. And if you're like an independent market rate, non-Section 8 landlord, this can be a little bit, I find it a little bit misleading. And it's geared towards tenants who are trying to find housing, and rightly so. I get it. And they've got in the bottom right hand corner, they have this keybot where you can like type in a question, which is kind of cool. All right, I'm gonna go to the next one. This one, I had to go to a law office website, fritchlaw.com. Now, I am not endorsing them. I simply was just looking for guidance on abandoned items left behind by a tenant, and I could not find anything in the user guides or in the tenancy laws, the landlord-tenant relations. So this came up, and so this was actually very informative about handling abandoned property in Indiana. And so take it as a reference if you want. If you really have questions, or if you're in this situation in Indiana and you're in an abandoned a unit situation where you've got a tenant personal property, you can call legal aid. There are other sources. You don't have to just rely on this one. But this one says in Indiana, the topic of landlord-tenant abandoned property can be overwhelming. No kidding. But understanding it is crucial for landlords eager to protect their investments. When a tenant seemingly vacates a property, landlords often wonder about their next steps. Here's the quick breakdown. This is kind of cool. Abandonment definition. A tenant's property is deemed abandoned if a reasonable person concludes that the tenant has vacated without intent to return, meaning the neighbors haven't seen them come and go in several days or over a week. The utilities are shut off. The keys are on the counter. The unit is reasonably empty. or they left you a note. They texted you saying, I'm leaving, or I'm being arrested and I'll be in prison. I mean, this is what happens, right? Okay, so that's the definition of abandonment. Action for landlords. Once abandonment is presumed, a landlord may petition the court to remove the tenant's belongings legally from the unit. And then property handling. A tenant's belongings must be stored appropriately, allowing for potential retrieval within a set time frame. And that's the key. Anytime we're talking about abandoned property, you're looking for two things. The first thing is you're looking for a time amount, like a certain amount of days. It might even be a couple months. But what you're looking for is there's a set amount of time where you as the landlord are going to be storing items, and the whole time you're trying to get a hold of the tenant, even if you know they're not there. You're making goodwill effort to get a hold of the tenant, but you have to wait a certain amount of time. So that's the first thing you're looking for. The second thing you're looking for is you're looking for typically a dollar amount. Now, not all locations have this dollar amount. I haven't seen a dollar amount yet, but we might as we go through here. And the dollar amount sets a threshold. Typically, it's some, hundreds of dollars, whatever it is. Below that threshold, it will likely say you can dispose of it as you want. Like if it's food, if it's, worthless, if it's ratty old clothes that's not worth that amount, whatever the threshold is, then they'll say you can dispose of it as you see fit, whatever. But if it's greater than that threshold, there will be some kind of criteria. Very likely you'll have to inventory it. You may even have to petition the court, but there'll be something that it's like it's more valuable. So then it's more serious and it typically changes the rules above that threshold. So those are the two things we're always looking for abandoned property. Okay, so this one, he's got a little graph here. It says inventory the items, create a detailed list of all personal property left behind by the tenant. That's fine. Consider the storage costs before deciding to store or dispose of the property. And there's make sure you're not liable for any damages to the stored items. There's no liability for damage. And the key to understanding abandonment in Indiana is a key aspect of managing rental properties. Okay, well, we've gone through some of this. When a tenant vacates, abandoned property, court order. Okay, if you find yourself dealing with abandoned property, the next step is often to seek a court order. Now, again, if you're questioning what to do, you can call legal aid. You can call some of these other locations that I've got in the hyperlinks. Storage facility. After obtaining a court order, landlords must store a tenant's belongings in court-approved storage facility. This step ensures that the tenant has the opportunity to reclaim their items. According to the Indiana Code, tenants have up to 90 days, so there's your key, there's your time frame, up to 90 days to retrieve their property after receiving notice. If they fail to do so, the storage facility may sell the items. Now, here's the trick though. You have to count the days. According to the code, they have up to 90 days after receiving notice. So it looks like you need to send a certified letter to their last known address. It could be the unit. Okay, and then you want to inventory these items. There's no liability. Yeah, you want to make sure they're saying by properly documenting and handling these abandoned items, landlords can significantly reduce their liability. Okay, storage costs. Legal steps for landlords. I'm not seeing a dollar amount here, but if the storage facility is going to sell it, then that sort of takes it off the landlord, which is good. Yeah, so it's talking about 90 days. Conclusion. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so that's the answer is that it goes to the storage facility, state approved storage facility. Okay, so I've got some self-help items in here. I don't think we're going to find too many more about the bingo card, but I will take a look here as we go through with what's missing, because things like late fee, rent increases, we didn't see any of that in any of our documents that we've seen so far, but we'll do a couple other little searches as we go through. So this, if you're watching on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, indianalegalservices.org, help for Hoosiers, apply for legal aid. And then typically what I normally do, if I'm looking for something for help, I go all the way down at the bottom and there's a phone number. There it is. So you could just call them, get involved, legal information, all of that. View the events. So this is something, if you're interested, you might attend one of these events. Now these are stale. These are from 2024. But they might have some more updated things as well. Okay, moving on. IAAonline.net. This is the Indiana Apartment Association. Now, I am starting to make sure that I'm throwing more self-help groups that if you are a landlord, either seasoned or newbie, whatever you are at in your Indiana rental life, I want to make sure that you are getting in the room with other landlords like you. And so here is a couple of upcoming events for the Indiana Apartment Association. Join, how to join. This is what they do. They unite people. And so this might not be a bad thing. Events calendar. Let's see what's coming up. So, oh, they have all kinds of stuff in here. Certified pool. What is this one? Reverse trade show. Interesting. They got a lot. I mean, there's like 8 events on here. And then looks like the certified apartment manager program. Looks like there's lots of different either networking events or courses you can take. Here's a fair housing event. Let's look at that one. Fair housing, case lessons every housing professional should know. It's a free Zoom webinar for an hour. Bingo. Like this is the kind of stuff like this is really, and it's free for members. So if you're not a member, you could get in there, register now. Let's just see for this, how much is it to go? It may make you, oh, it's $45, but still, no, wait a minute, non-member course registration, $90. Okay, but still, if you're going to become a member, which again, you might consider doing that. That might work for what you're doing, um, and get in the room with other landlords. That's good. Okay, so just go down here. And again, if you've got questions, there's their phone number. I always scroll down all the way to the bottom, and they're affiliated with the National Apartment Association, so that's cool. Okay. Then I found this Facebook group, Indiana Landlord-Tenant Association. Now it's quite a small group, right? Public group, only 137 members, but it sounds like if you've got some issues, like this one, it talks about, just scrolling down. I'm looking for a home. Here's the question, da 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 da. You could have like a very small, intimate group of people to ask. So if you're an Indiana landlord, you might consider joining this Facebook group. And there are likely others. Like this is not the only one. There are actually national ones. You might see me in the national ones as well. I also looked for tenants associations and I found this one on Instagram. So this one has got 187 followers, not too many posts, but you can see, again, this is going to be a lot of resources or potentially events that you might be interested in if this is in your local area. It's kind of cool. Okay, and then the last one, I always throw in the State Bar Association only because I want to make sure that if you have legal trouble, you can call legal aid and they will very likely assist you. And indianalegalhelp.org, which I also added in the show notes. So you have those, and then you also have the Bar Association. So typically what I say is if you are a landlord and you are kind of stuck in a situation in Indiana that you might consider paying even, 30 or 50 bucks, whatever it is, typically there is some kind of a consultation fee that you might just need a little bit of guidance and self-help. And so you don't necessarily need to hire an attorney and pay a retainer and all that. You could do that, of course. But if you just have a few questions, then you just need someone to ask the questions to. So this one for Indiana Bar Association, free on-demand learning. Now this looks like it's all for attorneys, but this one, hire a lawyer. Like there's several different resources here that you could take a look at. Yeah, interesting. Okay, I'm going to go back to the handbook for landlords and tenants, and I'm going to look for a few things because I'm not seeing anything regarding an application fee. So I'm just going to search. I'm just going to search and just say fee. And so it doesn't, okay, so okay, let me put in here. How about application fee? Nope. Application fee is not in the document. How about late fee? So the only place it's shown, oh, there's a second one. Is there a late fee? So it looks like it depends on if it's in the lease or not. So as a landlord, if you do not have a reasonable late fee in your lease, you should consider one because it looks like it's not specified, right? And let's talk about a grace period as well. These are all terms that I have. So it's saying, okay, so breach of lease. Uh, if your lease says that you may not have any pets and you bring a dog into the home, you've breached a lease. Another example of breaching the lease is if you fail to pay rent on time or with any grace period stated in the lease. Now, notice there, the grace period is not defined by Indiana. The grace period is defined by the lease. It's defined by you as the landlord in the lease. So make sure that you are either if you want a grace period, because there's lots of locations where there is no grace period. Rent is due on the first or whatever day you deem, and the next day it's late, and so there is no grace period. So you just want to make sure you're clear on what to do. Okay, let's see what else is not involved. Oh, rent increases. They didn't talk about rent increases at all. Rent increase is not in the document. Wow. Okay, so let's go back to the code here. And this one, I'm going to go back out to the main, this one. There we go. Security deposits, moving storage tenants property. So this is abandoned rights. So this would be the abandonment. So this is the other hyperlink that I had in here as well. Sale of unclaimed property. Yeah. This is talking about the liability aspect. You want to make sure you are keeping notes on everything, exempt property. Okay. So this was about security deposits, notice of damages, return of deposits, and then it's all these definitions. But I am looking for rent increase, really? Rental agreement, right of access, emergency possessive orders, recording leases longer than 3 years. Some places don't like to have super long leases, and if they do, they want you to record it on title. Let's see what they do. Yeah, necessity of recording. That's exactly what they want you to do. So they want you to put recorder's office, because what it does is it actually puts it on title of the unit. So if you sell the unit or it's foreclosed on, whoever's buying or foreclosing on it is aware on the title that there is a long-term lease there. That I've seen that before, but not in a long time. Interesting. Kind of cool. Okay, we're still looking for rent increases. I'm not really sure. Um, it doesn't look like it is regulated at all, which tells me that you can increase the rent whenever you want. You can increase it by the amount that you want, and the proper notice of rent increase is basically what you want it to be, but it's got to be relatively reasonable. It can't be like, hey, your rent is due tomorrow and I'm going to increase it by, 200%. That doesn't work, right? But you've got to figure that out. Victims, okay. Okay, I think that's it because you can't, like, there isn't anything else. So Indiana hit some interesting points like acceleration clause, pent rent, it mentioned renter's insurance, but it misses all kinds of other things like rent increases. There's no rent control. That's kind of different. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. What I'm going to do now is I am going to go through the bingo card and we're going to talk about what was hit, what was not hit for Indiana. This is actually really interesting what was put in here. Okay, so let's start. Application fee, all the fees, application rent, late fees. Okay, tenant application fee is not regulated by Indiana. Landlords may charge reasonable non-refundable application or screening fees if disclosed in advance. Now, typically, what I've seen is it's got to be reasonable. Like you can't charge a $200 application fee to do a $30 criminal record check, right? Like it's got to be reasonable. Even an application fee, even if it was $50, that is very likely considered reasonable, but I would check with your local real estate attorney before actually setting an application fee. But it looks like you can have one and it's not regulated. Grace period for late rent. We talked about this. There's no mandatory statutory grace period. Rent is late the day after the due date unless the lease states a grace period. Why you would put a grace period in your lease, I'm not sure. But if rent is due on or before midnight on the first, which mine is, which is why I can rattle it off like that, then on the second it is late fee, and then on the third they get papers. This is how we do it. Late fee amount. Indiana has no specific cap or formula for late fees at all, but any fee must be clearly stated in the lease and may not be unconscionably high. Again, it has to be reasonable, right? So typically, 5, 10% of the flat of the rental amount. Like there's a reasonable part to it. Okay, security deposits. Indiana allows standard monetary security deposits, and there's no requirement to hold deposits in a separate or interest-bearing account. Landlord can keep them in any account. But I will tell you, as a good best practice from one landlord to another, you don't want to commingle a deposit in an operating account if you can avoid it. Now, in Indiana, it's not required. You can do whatever you want in Indiana. You can put all the money into one account. But it seems like it is way easier, especially if you're doing taxes, especially if you've got a bookkeeper and accountant, if you put that security deposit in a separate account. Now, here's how I do it. I have a checking account that is my operating account. This is where the rents come in. This is where checks go out. This is where the vendors are paid, utilities are paid, all of that. And I have a second account that is typically a savings account, can be another checking account, but it's typically a savings account that is called deposits on hold. That's what it's called. And any location that we have our rentals, this is exactly how I do it. And so all of my security deposits live in that account. So at the end of the year, when my accountant says I need to do an accounting of the deposits on hold account and I need to know how much money you've got in there. Now remember, that's an interest-bearing account. You still have to pay interest sometimes depending on your rentals. So it's got a little bit of money in there, and then you remit the interest back when the tenant moves out. So keep that. But there's no requirement to put it in an interest-bearing account in Indiana. You can absolutely commingle it there. I've never seen that happen, and it's not necessarily a good practice. So just keep that in mind. Okay, no statutory maximum on security deposits or pet deposits. Wow. Max on security deposit or pet deposit. Just be careful. If you make it too high, then it's not affordable, right? You won't get a tenant. Lease content and format, lease wording, and details. A valid Indiana lease should include all kinds of standard items like landlord names, tenants, property descriptions, lease term, rent amount, due date, blah, blah, blah. Okay, typical lease stuff, but there is not a pre-made lease in Indiana. I did not see one. There's not a pre-made form. So if you need one, I would highly recommend start talking to your legal aid, start seeing. In fact, you might even reach out to the Indiana Apartment Association and say, hey, I need a standard lease. What do you guys use? They'll tell you. They may even share one with you. Delivery of signed lease required, not explicitly mandated by statute. Is the end of a fixed lease abrupt or auto periodic? The lease ends on the stated date. So in Indiana, it ends abruptly. So if you sign 1 year lease, that's it. Okay, acceleration clause if early termination. Indiana permits acceleration clause, making all remaining rent immediately due if clearly stated. Courts may scrutinize for unconscionability, so it may not appear to be reasonable if you do that. And I've only seen if early termination, but the example that was put from this user guide said that if you fail to pay rent on time, that the acceleration clause is enacted then. And I've never seen an example like that before. It's kind of interesting. Okay. Is an emergency contact required for abandonment, incapacitation, death, or imprisonment? No statewide requirement in Indiana to collect an emergency contact, but many leases request one as a practical measure, and it's really helpful if the emergency contact is the next of kin. That is helpful, especially in the age of our aging boomers. Abandoned items, we did talk about this, value, storage, disposition. Indiana statutes allow landlords to treat property as abandoned after lawful possession is regained by the court and clear indications that the tenant has left. And then you basically have 90 days to store the items. I didn't see a threshold on this, like a dollar amount. So it's 90 days. You store everything 90 days and then you deal with it. Okay, pets, inspections, and notice. Pets and animals, pet deposit or pet rent, both are allowed. And there is no legal cap on pet deposits or pet fees, but it must be disclosed in the lease. And keep in mind that an assistant animal is not a pet. An assistant animal has a job. It's not a pet. Condition inspection at move-in, not strictly required statewide, however, strongly recommended with a complete move-in condition report with the tenant, and keep photos for deposit disputes at the end. Now, remember, you can't go back in time and take pictures and do a condition inspection. You must do it at the time. As inconvenient as it is, you've got to do it. Condition inspection at move-out, not legally required. But again, if you're going to take deductions from that security deposit, you have to have proof that you had the condition at the end, at the beginning. No maintenance, no mandated periodic inspection schedule. The landlord must keep the premises in habitable condition, and you've got to have reasonable advance notice to enter, except in the in the event of an emergency. Okay, almost done. Rent increases. How often can rent be increased in Indiana? No rent control. For fixed term leases, rent cannot be raised during the term unless the lease allows it. For month to month, the rent can be raised between periods with proper notice, which appears to be 30 days. And how much can the rent increase? No statewide cap on increases. The amount must not be discriminatory or retaliatory and must comply with any local ordinances, which is why you've got to do your own research on your local area where your rentals are, not where you are, but where your rentals are. And there is no, how often can you raise the rent? You can do it every 5 minutes, it looks like in Indiana. Okay, renter's insurance is mentioned, but it's not required. Abuse of access is defined, and landlord retaliation is defined, but does not talk about the timing. And so it just appears that for the remainder of that lease, eviction, retaliatory actions from the landlord is valid for the end of until the end of the lease. Okay, return of deposit or bond timing. In Indiana doesn't have a bond requirement, but return of deposit, it looks like in Indiana is 45 days. Can you use the deposit as last month's rent? Yes or no? In Indiana, you cannot, but you can in advance ask for the last month's rent in advance. Now, would I put that in my deposits on hold? Yes, I would, and that way you can keep it. But you have to make a note. You've got to have good bookkeeping if you're doing security deposit, first month's rent, last month's rent. You got to make sure you understand all that because some of that goes on your balance sheet and some of it goes on your profit and loss sheet. You got to know the difference. Okay, penalty for not returning a security deposit. It looks like the yeah, the tenant, if you don't return it within 45 days, the landlord may lose the right to withhold any part of the deposit, and the tenants can sue for the deposit and potential additional damages and attorney's fees. How long can you give a notice of eviction due to non-payment of rent? Utilities looks like 10-day notice to pay or quit. And how long? Looks like 10 days for correction of mischief. And then how long until you can get possession of a unit? Well, you've got to have a court order. So as quickly as you can get that court order in the hearing. Are there any standard letters and wording in Indiana? Does not look like. Okay, and that wraps up our bingo card. Interesting. Lots of things that are landlord friendly because they're not noted in Indiana. Each of my location specific podcasts are set up in the exact same way, answering the same four questions. What are the basics of that state or province location? What are the nuances of that location? What's different? What stands out? What's some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant? And where can you get help in your local real estate or province? Local real estate, estate. Okay, I can figure this out. Where can you get help in your local real estate, state, or province? Because I do talk to US and Canadians. And as I did all of that, you saw me keep track on my bingo card of standard items I see most often in tenancy laws in different locations, which help as a summary for this location. Now, this is the same format for every location specific episode. So if you're interested or looking at property in another state or province or territory, you already know the game plan of how I'm going to do it. It's just a different location. Now, one more time, this episode is not all inclusive. You must research further in your specific area, including your county, regional district, parish, district, city, governing body, whatever it is that involves your rental location. But today's episode is designed to at least get you started. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are that you're either new to real estate or you want to be in real estate in Indiana. Things you can do to help yourself. One, read the Indiana Landlord-Tenant Relations document. Make sure you are up on the rules of the game. Second, get in the room with other Indiana landlords, either physically or on social media. In-person meetup groups can be found by jumping on social media and asking. Lots of local folks are asking questions just like you are. You just need to get in the room, whether you're physically in the room or on the computer getting in the room, like on a Zoom call. You just need to ask the questions. I hope you enjoyed today's show all about Indiana. Don't forget to subscribe for more expert advice and real stories from across the rental property world and beyond. I'm recording this episode today from San Antonio, Texas. Why? Because we have medical appointments and also because real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode live right now in the library, episode 223 about the Australia state Tasmania. I'll see you there.